So, I decided to resurrect something from the early days of this channel. The first subject video I ever actually did, and it seems appropriate that today, Halloween, is the day to bring back this tale, and elaborate better on it, and be more informative, and that is the tale of the Attack of the Dead Men, or the Third Battle of Osowiec Fortress in 1915. Now, the reason I wanted to do this video, I wasn't very happy with how the first one was. It was my first video, I rushed into it, and I didn't have many notes. But this time, we're going to do it the right way, and we're going to discuss the Attack of the Dead Men. Now, the attack took place in August of 1915. This will be the end of the first year of the war that had started back in July of 1914. Now, the Russian Empire had actually shocked the Central Powers with how quickly they had mobilized. Now, Russia is a giant country at this point, but it's a very spread out population. But the Tsar, Nicholas II's military council, was able to mobilize and transfer troops far quicker than before assumed. It especially shocked the Central Powers when in August of 1914, the Imperial Russian Army in fact invaded East Prussia in the German Empire. This was because Germany's plan, which was called the Schlieffen Plan, called for them to take out France while Russia mobilized, and then once taking Paris, move 3/4 of their forces east to take on the Russians with the Austro-Hungary and Turkish support. But the plan already got messed up when earlier in August, the German invasion of Belgium had ignited England's entry into the war. So when on August 17th, 1914, the Russians invaded East Prussia and the Austrian province of Galicia, they in some ways rattled the Central Powers. Russia attacked East Prussia with the 1st, 2nd, and 10th armies. All that was in this area was the defensive army of reserves known as the German 8th Army, commanded by a man named Maximilian Prittwitz. Now, again, this army was a defensive army, not meant to take on 3 Russian armies, so Prittwitz began to retreat with no other option. Berlin became very angry at this failure, obviously, and then replaced Prittwitz, the commander, and his deputy with 2 other men. On August 22nd, 1914, Paul von Hindenburg and Erich von Ludendorff were put in command of the German 8th Army, with one job: to expel the Russians from the German Empire. At the Battle of Tannenberg in East Prussia, Hindenburg and Ludendorff almost completely crushed the Russian 1st and 2nd armies. Of the 250,000 Russians deployed, they would suffer over 170,000 casualties. That's more than half their force. Actually, I think it is. No, it's more than half their force, yeah. The German force, on the other hand, of 150,000, would only suffer a little under 14,000 casualties. This pretty much halted any Russian continued push into Germany. In fact, with the exception of, I believe, one battle, the rest of the Eastern Front campaign became nothing short of Russians being consistently pushed back or holding off long enough to later withdraw. In July of 1915, the Russian High Command began something known as the Great Retreat. This was the Russian High Command realizing their front was deteriorating as the Germans and Austrians were flooding new divisions and forming new armies every week. And this did not even include the fighting in the Balkans against the Ottoman Empire and the Bulgarians. So they decided to do an organized retreat back into Russian holdings in Poland. Of these holdings, an important position was the fortress of Osowiec. Now, early in the war, the Germans tried to take the fortress. Twice, actually. Osowiec controlled the area east of Warsaw, but also controlled the rail lines, which were important not only to the Russian supply effort, but the Russian withdrawal effort. So Hindenburg wanted to take it, to cut off the supplies, but also the hopes to pull more Russians out of their situation. However, the Russians, as I said, were already withdrawing. The fortress was under the command of a 21-year-old lieutenant, Vladimir Kotlinski. He had very simple orders, and it was to hold. His force was made up of 500 Russian soldiers under his command, and then another 400 militia commanded by Vladislav Stremensky, who he actually, because he was a militia commander, Kotlinski outranked him, but he was a native of Poland. But now let's look at the year of 1915. In Germany, a chemist named Fritz Haber created a new sort of weapon. Now, World War I is the war that we got tanks from, semi-automatic handguns, and light machine guns, but Haber didn't create any of these. In fact, he created the most merciless and deadly of all the weapons with his team, and that was none other than toxic gas. Now, gas was being primarily used on the Western Front, but Hindenburg made a plan. He would have 14 battalions, numbering anywhere from 7 to 8,000 soldiers, ready. The German gas teams would shoot gas across the field, eliminating the Russian defenders. Then, with their masks on, the battalions would move in and secure the position. Haber's team then arrived and began to prepare for the coming attack. Now, it wasn't the way we see it in movies like All's Quiet on the Western Front or 1917. In those, we see the later version of gas projectiles or gas shells, gas cylinders that would be fired from artillery and strike behind enemy lines. This was a later war technology. The way originally was either from hoses or balloons. So the way this process worked was a system of hoses would connect to a truck, a balloon, whatever was creating the gas, and it would be sprayed from the front lines towards the enemy. Now, this took much longer periods of time, obviously, because trenches were sometimes miles apart, or kilometers for my European viewers. Also, there was a fear of the change of a wind's direction, that it would direct the gas back towards you. But Hindenburg was not going to be dissuaded. He did not want to risk the lives of his 8,000 men. So on August 6th at 4 o'clock in the morning, the German gas balloon batteries began to release chlorine gas towards the Russian positions. The chlorine gas actually released an eerie green haze with it, not like a yellow we commonly associate with gas attacks in World War I. Now, no one alive today has ever seen a gas attack like these. Of course, we have chemical warfare in parts of the world today, but this was truly something different. Chlorine gas would react with the moisture in a person's body and begin to severely burn an individual so far to the point that your organs would literally disintegrate and melt, and you would begin to bleed from all extremities. So Lieutenant Kotlinski and his men at first were extremely confused as they watched the green mist slowly approach, and after a few moments, the soldiers began to realize what was happening. They were choking and ripping undershirts and handkerchiefs, dumping water into them in order to stop the effect of the gas. Sadly, a lot of the measures helped worsen the condition of the gas. For a day, the green mist was all over Osowiec. German high command from a distance looked on as the Russians collapsed, spitting blood from their faces and eyes. What a nightmare must have been to watch. But to Hindenburg, it was a necessary nightmare to save German lives. Across the Osowiec front, 1,600 Russians were now incapacitated. As the gas dissipated on August 7th, the order was given to move forward. From the German lines, 7,000 German soldiers with gas masks on crossed no man's land with zero resistance. Upon coming to the Russian position, the soldiers were very clearly horrified. The sight of these dead Russians, their faces covered in blood-soaked rags, the very skin from their bodies melting away. The Germans' grief then turned to horror when one by one the in quote dead men began to rise up and look at the Germans. Among these was Lieutenant Kotlinski, who would then give the signal to countercharge towards the Germans. Now, about 100 versus 7,000, clearly the 7,000 should win. But this is us looking at it from a modern perspective. This is 1915. This has never been seen before on Earth. Much like other World War I things, such as industrial warfare or tanks, these things had never happened before. So if you were a young German, probably raised religious, you now see this. Men believed dead are rising up, coughing up blood. Some men are missing eyes, some are missing whole chunks of skin. They're coughing, they're spitting blood. Not only had they just risen up, but they are now running at you. The Germans actually went into a full rout. So a rout is pretty much a disorganized retreat. That's pretty much like everyone's, there's no hope, everyone's running away. So terrified that many of them actually got caught in their own barbed wire defenses. Also, other deformed and dying Russians quickly took control of the fort's artillery batteries and opened up on the retreating Germans. Meanwhile, other Russian reinforcements came up to the rear, from the rear, to reinforce the decimated line. The Russians won a resounding victory. Unfortunately, most of the men who valiantly stood up and chased the Germans back would die from complications from their chemical wounds. Kotlinski himself would die on August 19th, 1915, from wounds from the attack. The Russians would blow up the fortress on August 18th to take the commanding presence of the fortress from the Germans. The Russian Great Retreat would then end in September of 1915. 800 men had died the day of the attack. Of the Russian defenses of 900, the remaining 100 would die or live with lifelong illnesses that would follow them into the peacetime. Why I thought this would be a good Halloween episode was because this is honestly a horrifying sight. Like, we may see zombie movies and things like that, but to be a German soldier in 1915, seeing 100 men you believe to be dead rise up covered in blood and missing large parts of their skin, that is something of true, and I mean it, true terror. Thanks for joining us. I like to bring this back and give it more justice. Like I said in that video, the band Sabaton has a pretty epic song about the attack of the dead men that I will 100% leave a link for, and you should 100% check it out. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please like, share, and if you have anything to add or any questions, be my guest and comment. Nothing better than conversations on these subjects. If we are new, please subscribe to the channel. There's that little red button at the bottom of the screen. We have such great growth and would love to have more people join this ever-growing community. Thanks again, and see you in the next one.